this session, the idea is to go full deep about NFTs. And I'm going to start first giving a background and discussing like why NFTs are interesting in the first place, giving some context, and then we're going to do the same thing. And after the introduction, we can do this more like a discussion. If you have concerns or if you have ideas about NFTs, like we can make it more interactive. But I'm going to try to give you some insights about how everything started in terms of where NFTs come from and all of the things that are kind of like needed around all of the nuances that go with NFTs. So I call it history and the important aspects. First, how it all started. So this is 2016. There is a chain called XCP, because Counterparty is today not very well known, but it is a protocol built on top of Bitcoin that uses Bitcoin transactions to essentially build things like tokens on top of Bitcoin, which is not possible. So the idea is to create abstractions like objects that you can use them, for example, as fungible and non-fungible tokens. And one example of that is people were thinking, how can we do shares or how can we do tokenized art? And Counterparty was an innovator in that arena. The problem with the project is that it was built on top of Bitcoin. And so, for example, to do one Counterparty transaction, it required 2 Bitcoin transactions. So you needed 20 minutes to do one single like token transfer. And it had also other problems. In general, the project was not adopted, but it was pioneer to enough to see like the emergence of NFTs. So how did it happen? Someone in a Telegram group shares this image, which essentially takes the image, puts it on a server, and takes the URL and puts it as the information, let's say, that goes along with like the description that it's part of the object, and creates the token itself on chain using this Counterparty protocol. And then essentially what you can do is you have a token which is unique, it's non-fungible, like the ones we talked about, but you have attributes, and one of those attributes, it's this URL where you can go and see this image. So that's what it is, like essentially what happened in 2016. And he was laughing, saying, hey, this image, I'm showing you this art, and it may be worth thousands of dollars one day. And actually it did. So this is the Rare Pepes, and it's the first collection that happened on top of Bitcoin that started playing with the idea of not everything is money. And the concept here that it's not all of the times well understood, because some people say, oh, JPEGs, trading JPEGs. Well, let's be very clear. NFTs are tokens before JPEGs, right? And tokens are very powerful, are as powerful as any other token on the blockchain. So I would say a better way to frame what an NFT is, and a more honest description, it's a token. It's a blockchain-based token with a face, right? And that changes the perception because, yeah, the JPEG is the face, but you can see that there's beauty, but there's also brains, right? In the token itself, and that the brains part, it's actually the most interesting part. And the face, it's important because it made blockchain more accessible. It gave the friendliness that blockchain didn't have before NFTs, right? So it's not the same thing to talk about money and that abstraction that many people like don't feel very attracted to these type of conversations, but this changed completely the game because it's easier to understand. Here's a digital item, it looks like a Rare Pepe, and you can also do the same things that you can do with any other token. So this is how it all started, and obviously it was not to tokenize a house, right? It's something that started with art and that started with collectibles, because that's a world where you cannot price an art or a collectible in the same way that you can price a tomato, right? There is no comparison, and there is no one that can tell you how much an art. It's very subjective. The appreciation then makes it really powerful for these to emerge. It doesn't mean that everything will be forever art and collectibles, but it's easy to see why it all started as a toy, and it all started in these two verticals. But why we're now here in this boot camp that we will talk about also real world assets? What happened afterwards? It's several things were new in this era of the blockchain. One is just the idea of non-fungibility that NFTs are based on, which is very evident. What this means is, instead of having many, there's one of one, and that mimics a lot like the way that in reality we value things. So like the way that art works is basically there's one piece and just one, and to have that same ability to represent one of one in the digital world, that was just by itself an important step in the blockchain world. The other thing is that, as I said, these are tokens, right? And tokens in the blockchain world are programmable. So at the end of the day, these are also tokens that are part of programs. And that makes them powerful to also automate things like royalties. It sounds like very now evident that it's one of the use cases, but think about before this, it was impossible to guarantee that with a trade, it goes a little amount that always goes to the one who is the creator of a certain asset. That automation part like inspired multiple artists to come, because that in a way represents like a guarantee that you will receive a revenue based on your creation. So that, I think, it's again by itself very interesting. The other thing that happened was that because these are unique people, like artists overall, started to play with this technology. This is part of a collection, very well known, produced by Larva Labs on Ethereum in 2017, using one standard on Ethereum, the ERC 721. And basically what this couple of guys did was, let's create a collection. Before this, there were no collections. So the first collection of all of them, CryptoPunks, it started as an experiment. They didn't want to make money. They didn't want to. So they basically created 10,000, now it's called profile pictures, but 10,000 CryptoPunks, like as a way to honor those CryptoPunks with strong ideas in the very beginning. And they generated a few attributes, like 3D glasses or one kind of hair. And then randomly, they put together those attributes, generating that through an algorithm, those 10,000 unique images. And each of them has an identifier, which is like this NFT. This is pre-ERC 721, right? So actually, ERC 721 was inspired by this collection, because before that, there were no standards. So these people were thinking, oh, there needs to be something that is not fungible. So they created a contract on Ethereum that later on, the people defining the ERC 721 standard actually started to get inspired by. And so they minted this collection, creating these 10,000 tokens. People started to claim this. People, obviously, some of them claimed 20, 100 of them. And yeah, a few years later, basically, they were trading by like probably in the order of $500,000. Some of them have been like sold for several millions of dollars. And And what is mind-blowing about this is not the amount. So the concept before NFTs was that you have an asset. Think of what we talked about, stablecoin. You have an asset in the bank, and that is like represented on chain. That's kind of like how we all started thinking about the power of blockchain. But in reality, what happened here was different. So a group of artists thought about this cool idea of generating with an algorithm these 10,000 profile pictures. And then that became the art piece itself. But just like, so the story and the narrative that goes with an art piece, all of the art pieces in the world have a story that make that art piece valuable. So there was no exception with this, except that by default, it was tokenized. So people could, for the very first time, own a piece of the, think of all the CryptoPunks as a tokenized piece of art with a face that can be traded because they're tokens. So I think you can argue, so this collection, what's interesting is it has no royalties. So there's no one pumping like this collection. Well, Yuga Labs later acquired like the rights. So it's kind of controversial as anything in blockchain, but no one was trying to make money. This is not a rug pull. So this was just a legitimate art project that utilized a new means with a story that is powerful to create something new that can be owned, right? And that doesn't require anything in the real world, in the off-chain world, to have value. And I think that's mind-blowing. Even in the bear market today, one of these things are traded for probably 40 ETH or something like that, which in my opinion is like, even in the current market conditions, you can see that this is a success, right? I don't think everyone should be trying to build that, which is what it happened. Everybody tried to build like a PFP collection. That's exactly what happens after something really meaningful happened. But there's real innovation, and there's real value, and there's real art. But for the first time, it takes the shape and form of a new media, that it's actually also tradable, and that it can be owned without a central party, and I think that's a big deal. Obviously, people started doing what people do, human things, saying like, which one is more like rare? I want that, and they started to appreciate more. So like humans started to use these media and using it in the way that made them feel comfortable, saying, okay, I want to pay more because I'm willing to pay more because I want the rare one. And so it started to also create a need of, okay, there's a world of art, but there is also like this other layer, which is the information that travels with these tokens. So I'm going to talk how the industry right now manages those standards that make possible for a token to be rarer, more rare, or less rare than others. But before that, just a quick note that XRPL, it was not pioneering this world, but it saw the opportunity that, or like, almost like there's no option to not have a functionality that mimics what the ERC 721 does, which is this ability to, on the top of not only fungible tokens, but also have the ability to mint these unique items. And before this, it was possible to do it in a hacky way on XRPL. There was a community standard that was proposed in order to create non-fungible tokens using like the traditional token standard, but it didn't have all the functionalities that I will talk about XLS 20, and that's why people thought that it's better. NFTs are here to stay. There are so many use cases that people started to think about. So at the protocol level, there was this consensus again that I talked that a new functionality was needed on the ledger. So on this slide, what I'm talking is just what happened. So very abstractly in the first talk, I talked about like the amendment process of new functionalities into the ledger, and this is how it works. This is how it looks like. Essentially, there was a consensus of 91% of the validator nodes were voting yes. That means that the amendment, the change, and the new functionality was added when there was consensus in 91.43%, right? And this is all part of history of XRPL. It also includes when it was enabled, October 31st, 2022. It's very recent, one day after my birthday, October 30th. And basically you can see what it's like the code version. You have the hexadecimal for the amendment ID and the name of what this new change that was proposed to the ledger was named. And you can see obviously like a reference to a URL where it's part of the data that you can embed in an amendment object, and that's it, right? So there was the 91%, it's the equivalent, so that means that above 80%, it's the minimum required to add a new functionality. This happened, and it got added in the history. So what happens afterwards? Well, what it means from the average Yo perspective is that you can have another transaction type on the ledger, right? Like Florent was talking about the transaction type payment. What it just happens with this is that there's a new transaction type that is called NFT tokenment. Actually, there's more than one. There's also like the ability to offer, like the ability to sell whatever NFT you have, and the ability, obviously, to accept those offers. So it creates those list of new transaction types and become available at the API level so that the libraries can be updated and now give the possibility to a normal Python developer like myself to do a very simple process, which is, well, actually, I don't need to import this anymore. This class is more like this NFT token, means the one that it's used. You also have the ability to form this object that is the one that you will need to send to the network and use the autofill helper function, which Florent said it's really, it just goes, queries the network, gets that missing piece of data that is required to fully form a valid transaction object, and you don't have to think too much about it. And essentially, these classes help you to easily form a transaction with this attribute, with these parameters. What is the account? What is like taxon ID that I'll talk more about it. Flags that also, if you want to build like a token that it's not transferable, there are flags to do it. I don't know if you've heard about soul-bound tokens. Are tokens that, in a way that if I do a course or I take a class and I get a certificate, like it makes no sense that I can transfer it. So you can make it not transferable. You can do that at a protocol level using like the flags. And you can add a face, right? What I talked about. You can add the face to your token by, well, converting to hexadecimal, one URL. So essentially you can have on your server a piece of data that it's an image, and it will be there. Obviously, this is not optimal, so I think you can see that what you need is a universal permanent URL. That's why IPFS became like the default way of doing it, because you don't have to rely on someone having and hosting an image on a server, random server that then can go away. So I'll talk a little bit more how IPFS is used, but essentially here you can just add like the hash that represents the unique URL that IPFS system offers, and that's good enough for the NFT to live forever without relying on a third party to run a server. I'll go deep in the IPFS thing a little bit more, but I want to talk about the particular standard that the community created in order to give more expressiveness than just this URI to the one who's creating an NFT. And essentially, this is This is because NFTs are beyond art and collectible. So people started thinking, oh, what if like an NFT can be music, or it can represent like maybe a piece of real estate. So people started thinking there will be a ton of types. So we need a way, we need a standard so that we can know what we're talking about. So if you get a token or you're going to buy a token, you can have at least full information of what the object is, and that's essentially why metadata standards are needed. So one of the leaders in the marketplace arena of NFTs, OpenSea, came up with a standard that it's widely used on Ethereum. So essentially, what they do is they also include in the attributes of the object in the blockchain one, let's say one URL that it's a pointer to a file that lives on IPFS, where people can see exactly all of the attributes. And this is important because that's how people start seeing how rare mine is, because they can see what's the universe, what's the total universe, and how much of the percentage of a collection has a specific attribute that I'm interested in. You can see like it's 5%, it's 10%. So again, the community itself, beyond blockchain, started to come up with things that they wanted to be part of the NFT world. So it's really important to understand that this is not part of the protocol level. This is something that people started to signal that they need in order for this to become useful. So these are evolving standards. And one of them, specifically for XRPL, it's called XLS24D, which was proposed by Mike, or alias XTokenize. Is a very active community member, and he went to all of the different blockchains. He went to all and said like, oh, I took the best ideas of things that have worked, and I'm proposing this. So you can go to, basically, if anyone comes with a good idea that needs to happen on XRPL, they go to the foundation GitHub, and there's a procedure to create a proposal. Like this one is a proposal. The D is for draft. That means that it hasn't, it's basically anyone can propose a standard. And this one, inspired by the good work that has happened in other chains, is basically a schema. And the schema will tell you what the token is about. So think of NFTs as a token that it also has the ability to carry policies. So those policies will need some data standard. And what Mike has proposed is a way that it's rich and expressive enough so that you can represent art, or you can represent real estate, or you can represent whatever music. And this is important because blockchains are open, but you still need some interoperability among like the exchanges and the apps to visualize all of the different things, all of the media. Imagine that this represents music, so I need to find a way to play that music. So in general, these metadata standards are needed to make the experience of buying, selling, or holding NFTs a better thing. So essentially, it is. So because this is not at the ledger level, it's like it doesn't have to be amended, right? So like people are using it, and this is one example actually. So this one, it's an NFT that I minted for a meetup to celebrate the amendment of the existence of NFTs on XRPL. So we did a meetup in London. And I asked one of the artists in the community, Ceci, who's also Mexican like me, I said, hey, Ceci, can you build something like a collectible for this event? So she built this, actually it's an animation. I cannot see it because right now it's just my screen, but you can see it on BitHum. She created a file, and essentially what I did is I used the XLS24 metadata standard, and I put like the attributes that I wanted to be part of this NFT, right? Which is, I wanted to add 2 attributes, location and artist. And you can see BitHome right now I didn't talk to BitHome. This is why standards are important. I didn't talk to BitHome, but BitHome can know that this NFT carries 2 attributes. One of them is where is it located. I call these mementos, and I should have done one for Paris. I still have time. So, and then you can see here essentially the URI, which is the data that lives on chain. As you can see, this is a non HTTP URL, which means that it's not vulnerable. IPFS, essentially what it does is it creates universal directions or routes. This represents the hash of the file that it's hosting. So basically, if you upload to a server that it's running IPFS a file, it will produce a hash of the image. So it's unique to that specific file. And that also becomes the URL that you can access from any point of entry in the IPFS network. So essentially, you don't need like an HTTP URL. You can actually host your own IPFS, and that becomes an entry point. And just by understanding what they call the seed, which is the CID, you can essentially identify uniquely that file, and that's why they call it the permanent web. So it's a very ambitious project. That's why I think it's interesting just beyond the NFT world. But what I did is I used the chain object, that is the XLS20, the NFT object, and I put this attribute that corresponds to not the image. Actually, that corresponds to a file that I created with the metadata. And part of the, and this is how it looks. So essentially, I didn't put like just the image that I uploaded to IPFS. What I did is I essentially embedded a link, an IPFS link that takes the people to IPFS where I hosted this file. This JSON object is essentially the one that carries the actual image URL, but it also includes a description, and this is respecting the XLS24 standard. And the XLS24 standard also, because Mike is not a simple guy, it also has a schema that references to. It's a picture of a picture of a picture. So this, you can actually see how rich the standard is by going to this schema. So all of the XLS24 compliant NFTs will have this one. It will be unique. It will be permanent, at least this version of the XLS24. And I just said, like, for this one, the type is art v0. And this is like the things that I wanted, including like an array that includes like these values that I mentioned, location and artist. And you can build rarity with these things. And because of the rarity, there's more or less value perceived by the community. And this is not on chain, which I think it's mind-blowing what you can build as an entrepreneur, creator, artist.
Could you elaborate a bit on the schema?
Yes. Here's the schema. So it's actually, there's a conversation, but I highly recommend, I mean, I just printed what it looks, but I thought it was going to be a question. So essentially what it does is, it's a schema where you can see what version is. It defines, again, that there's a type, that it needs to be a string. It's just a meta standard of the meta standard. So the idea, the whole point right now, exchanges are adopting this schema or this metadata standard, but they're open-minded. So right now it's not mature enough, the ecosystem. So let's say that XRP Cafe, which is a very well-known NFT marketplace, has adopted this metadata standard, but it's also has also adopted the OpenSea standard, that was brought from the Ethereum NFT world, And right now, I would say it's not a great place for NFT marketplaces because basically there are multiple languages that are competing among each other. So at some point, the community needs to signal what they find useful. I think this is one of the most flexible data standards. Sometimes the most expressive and complex standards are not the ones that win, right? Sometimes the first move advantage is so strong that probably in the future people will be using still like the OpenSea metadata standard, right? So right now what I've seen, as I said, like I use XLS24. I was able to mint the data, and the explorers are able to see the way that I wanted them to display it, which I think is really interesting. But I think, as Florent will demonstrate, you can actually use like the URI to put directly your image wherever it's hosted, even if it's hosted in your own server, and the explorers will interpret the data and will also display it successfully. Because as I said, right now, there's a little bit of experimentation. It's immature. But what I wanted to give you the idea of is how some level of customization happens beyond the blockchain, so that you can identify what happens at a blockchain level, which is like, again, being minimalist at a blockchain level is the best thing possible, and try to be expressive outside, but making reference to those standards so that there's a track on chain and people can get aligned. So this is kind of like the idea for you to, the idea to understand how in general it's structured the data, but honestly, the sky's the limit. And well, with that, I will pass it to Florent. So he will show you how essentially to do the same thing that you did with a payment for an NFT. And I just tried to give some information extra that has nothing to do with that process, but it's still relevant nonetheless. I would say in the universe of NFTs that are art, PFP is part of it, but yes, I think that's a good description. So it's not, you will not see all these different types. And also, there's a lot of innovation in different blockchains. I've seen mutable metadata standards, which is like, so is it mutable or not mutable? So there's debates of how mutable an NFT should be, right? So in order to make it mutable, so there's multiple ways to achieve that, but the idea is that the metadata, setting up the metadata in a way that can be changed in the future, right? That's sometimes it's possible at the blockchain level, because sometimes in some blockchains, you can add a transaction to modify, like let's say a blockchain object, and signal that after that point, maybe you make it immutable. So there's a way to make it mutable once, and some of, including like on Ethereum, people are doing it to do like the reveal. Like the reveal process is in a way like you do an on-chain operation that will modify the NFT itself so that it actually prints the ultimate pointer to the metadata. But other blockchains are essentially allowing you to make multiple modifications beyond just that reveal. So people are trying with those, so maybe to make it mutable. So you can think of a game maybe where over time, maybe the NFT looks different. Think of a Tamagotchi, and maybe the image, it's about like the same Tamagotchi, but who already maybe grows up, so it looks different. So again, it depends on what you think an NFT is. At the end of the day, NFT is a token. It's a token that has a face, or that has a body, but it also has a brain, and the brain has to do with what kind of like metadata standard it complies with, and with all of the different possibilities. I think you can see how this can be useful to represent things that either have the correspondent value outside of the blockchain world, or just some new pieces and NFTs that only live on chain, like the ones we've seen in the past. And I think both cases are interesting, and we just have seen just the start of a very exciting world. So, well, thank you so much. And if you're interested, again, we will talk more today. Thank you.